Welcome back, learner. I know you are here because, well, you want to gain knowledge quickly, thoroughly, and without feeling completely overwhelmed by the constant information overload out there.
Right, yeah, which is exactly what we aim to do here.
Exactly. So we are shifting our focus a bit today for this deep dive. We're stepping away from macro-level corporate strategies, so no grand market forces or visionary leadership theories today.
Thank goodness. We are zooming way, way in today.
Yeah, we are getting into the micro-interactions, the everyday office stuff. Our mission today is to decode the sort of dark, manipulative undercurrents of everyday workplace dialogue.
It's fascinating, but honestly, it is slightly unsettling once you really look at it.
Oh, it is deeply unsettling. But it's so necessary. We're looking at a curated linguistic breakdown of how language is actually used to construct power dynamics at work.
Yeah, and we are going to guide you through the structural mechanics of 3 very specific workplace phenomena today.
Right. Toxic positivity, corporate gaslighting, and weaponized incompetence.
Which are terms we hear a lot, but we really need to look at the structural mechanics of how they operate.
Right, because words are never just words. So, learner, imagine you are, doing the work of 3 people.
A very common scenario, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, completely. 2 people on your team quit last month. Their positions have been frozen, and you are just staring down the barrel of a major quarterly deliverable.
Just totally drowning.
Exactly. So you finally work up the nerve to go to your boss. You lay out the spreadsheets. You show them the hours. You explain that you are fundamentally lacking resources.
You bring the empirical data.
Right. And instead of looking at the math, your boss just smiles, leans back, and says, I know bandwidth is tight right now, but let's view this as a fantastic growth opportunity.
Yeah, it's a chance to build resilience.
Yes, resilience. And just like that, you haven't just been denied help. You have been linguistically backed into a corner.
You really have. It's a phenomenal trap. In 2 sentences, the entire reality of the situation has been rewritten.
Right, because if you complain again, well, now you are the problem.
Exactly. We tend to think of toxic workplaces in very binary terms, like we look for the screaming manager, the HR violations.
Yeah, the really obvious stuff.
Right.
Oh.
But the modern office has evolved. The toxicity is hidden in the pleasantries now.
Well, let's start with the first phenomenon from our sources because it really sets the baseline for the culture. Toxic positivity.
Yeah, toxic positivity. It sounds like an oxymoron at first.
It does. I mean, on the surface, workplace optimism seems universally good. If I have to spend 40 hours a week with people, I want them to be optimistic.
Sure, absolutely. Nobody wants to work in a miserable environment.
Right. So where exactly is the line drawn here? What is the difference between genuine optimism and this toxicity?
Well, it comes down to the policing of reality. Genuine optimism still leaves room for, empirical reality.
Like admitting things are bad.
Yeah. A genuinely optimistic team can look at a failing project and say, okay, this is currently a disaster, but I believe we can fix it.
Ah, okay. So there is an acknowledgement of the negative state.
Exactly. Toxic positivity, on the other hand, is the weaponization of cheerfulness. It is used to explicitly invalidate legitimate grievances.
So it enforces this sort of good vibes only culture.
Yes. And structurally, the whole point of that is to silence dissent. It masks systemic dysfunction.
Wow.
Yeah, if leadership mandates that every interaction has to be framed positively, they are outlawing the vocabulary you need to point out when something is actually broken.
Which brings us back to that boss I mentioned in the intro, the one rebranding the unmanageable workload as a growth opportunity.
Right. Let's look at the mechanics of that specific exchange.
Yeah.
You present a structural problem, understaffing.
Which is just a mathematical reality.
Exactly. But by framing it as a growth opportunity, the manager performs this incredible sleight of hand.
It completely shifts the focal point, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It takes a structural failure of management, the failure to adequately resource a team, and turns it into an individual test of your professional character.
Oh, wow. So if I go back to that boss and say, no, seriously, I'm drowning, I am no longer stating a fact about labor.
Right. Under their new linguistic framework, any complaint is instantly reframed as a lack of ambition. You just have a negative mindset.
You're not agile enough.
Exactly. The manager maneuvers you into a corner where expressing burnout feels synonymous with admitting defeat.
And that absolves the management entirely.
Completely. They don't have to admit they mismanaged the hiring pipeline. The problem isn't their bad management, it's your bad attitude.
That is so insidious. And there's another phrase from our sources that does this, which is Quintessential corporate cliche, we're a family here.
Yeah. Arguably the most insidious phrase in the modern corporate lexicon.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Because I get the cynicism, but isn't it a good thing to feel close to your coworkers?
Of course.
Like, it sounds comforting, you have a support system. I've been on teams where we really supported each other through hard times.
And it is entirely possible to form deep, genuine bonds with colleagues. That isn't the issue.
Okay, so what is the trap then?
The trap is the deployment of the familial metaphor by leadership as a management tool. We have to deconstruct this semantically.
Okay, let's break it down.
Think about what a family actually is. A family is bound by unconditional love. It's a permanent social contract.
Right. If my brother makes a terrible mistake, I don't lay him off.
Exactly. But a corporation is a transactional contract of labor for capital. It is highly conditional.
So by invoking the familial lexicon, what is leadership actually doing?
They are manipulating employees into accepting poor conditions. They are exploiting your natural desire for connection.
Oh, I see.
Our sources make a really sharp observation here. You would not ask for overtime pay for helping your mother clean the garage on a weekend.
Right. No, you do that out of love and loyalty.
Yes. Therefore, the family metaphor coerces employees to sacrifice their evenings and weekends under the guise of that same loyalty.
Wow. So it breeds systemic exploitation, but it's cloaked in affection.
Exactly. You aren't working unpaid overtime because management failed to plan. You are pitching in because that's what families do.
That makes a lot of sense. But what happens when that fails? Because eventually people hit a breaking point.
Could do.
When a worker refuses to be silenced by toxic positivity, management has to pivot.
Right. When the structural manipulation of toxic positivity fails, they pivot to a much more malicious, interpersonal, psychological tactic.
Corporate gaslighting.
Corporate gaslighting, yes, to evade accountability.
Now, gaslighting is a term that gets thrown around constantly online, often just meaning someone lied. But it's very specific.
Very specific. The origin provided in the source is actually from a 1938 play.
Right, the play Gaslight.
Yes. A husband manipulates the gaslights in the house to make them flicker, but persistently tells his wife she is hallucinating.
To make her doubt her own sanity.
Precisely. If she can't trust her own eyes, she becomes dependent on him.
So in the corporate realm, it's the deliberate manipulation of reality to evade accountability.
Yes. And the mechanism it relies on heavily is subjective reframing.
Subjective reframing. Break that down for me.
A gaslighter rarely disputes a hard fact. Instead, they attack your perception of the fact.
Okay, let's use the hypothetical from the text to see how this works. Say you confront a colleague about a hostile remark they made in a meeting.
Right.
Instead of a healthy apology, they say, I think you are misinterpreting my tone. You tend to take these things very personally. I was merely playing devil's advocate.
It's an infuriating response.
It really is. It's like a syntactical judo flip.
A syntactical judo flip. I love that.
Notice the heavy use of the second person pronoun there. You are misinterpreting. You tend to take things personally.
Exactly. It shifts the entire weight of the problem onto the victim. It shifts the focal point away from their objective behavior and onto your subjective emotional state.
Right. So they don't have to defend what they said.
No, they just diagnose you as overly sensitive, which entirely invalidates your rational reaction to their hostility.
And it makes you feel crazy.
Yeah.
But there's another tactic here too, right? The faux confusion.
Plausible deniability, yes.
Using phrases like, I don't recall that conversation, or that's certainly not how I remember it.
Right. It's faux naivete. By feigning a lapse in memory, they inject a seed of doubt.
Because human memory is fallible. So you think, wait, did I mishear them?
Exactly. And the danger is, if this is repeated chronically, the victim actually begins to doubt their own cognitive faculties.
Am I overreacting?
Yes. It is psychological warfare masked as casual office banter. It stymies accountability completely.
That is just wild. Okay, so let's look at the thematic progression here. We've seen how toxic positivity manipulates corporate culture.
Right. Yeah.
And gaslighting manipulates perception. So our third tactic, weaponized incompetence. This one manipulates labor itself.
Yes, it is the manipulation of effort. Weaponized incompetence or strategic ineptitude.
Strategic ineptitude. So what exactly is the definition here?
It is deliberately feigning ignorance or claiming an inability to perform a fundamental task, specifically to force a colleague to assume the burden of doing it.
Okay, so it's shifting labor, but how does it usually present itself?
Yeah.
Because if someone is just overtly lazy, They get fired, right?
Right. It requires camouflage. Let's look at the deceptive quote from the source.
Okay.
A coworker comes up to you and says, "I am just so terribly inept at Excel. You are so much more analytically gifted than I am. Would you mind just running these pivot tables for me? It will take you 5 minutes, whereas it would take me hours."
Okay, wait, let me push back on this a little.
Go ahead.
How do we know they aren't just genuinely bad at the software and asking for help? I mean,
yeah.
it sounds so submissive and flattering. You're so analytically gifted.
It is a masterclass in manipulation because structurally, it is a shifting of labor wrapped in a veneer of self-deprecation.
A veneer of self-deprecation.
Yes. The phrase, "I am just so inept," is not an admission of a flaw. It is a shield.
A shield. How so?
Because you can't be angry at someone for simply not knowing something. By claiming an inherent inability rather than a lack of effort, they insulate themselves from criticism.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because if they said, "I don't want to do this," you'd be mad.
Exactly. But here's the catch. They possess the intellectual capacity to learn. They just refuse to expend the cognitive energy.
Because it's easier to just flatter me into doing it.
Right. They rely on your eventual frustration and the pressure of the deadline to get the job done. The source describes it perfectly.
Parasitic behavior.
Parasitic behavior dressed up as vulnerability.
That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You're literally just doing their job for them while they compliment you.
Yes, and they offer zero reciprocal value.
Okay, learner, listen up. Now that we have diagnosed the insidious architecture of these power dynamics, we need to talk about defense.
It is so important.
How does a professional navigate this minefield without, appearing confrontational or like a bad team player?
Well, it requires immense emotional intelligence. You need linguistic discipline and a razor-sharp command of language.
You have to fight structure with structure.
Exactly. Let's start with deflecting weaponized incompetence.
Okay, so the coworkers at my desk singing my praises, begging me to do their pivot tables. What is the rule?
The primary rule is you must resist the urge to rescue them.
Refuse the delegation of work.
Yes. Do not accept the labor. Now, the source gives a very empowered script for this.
Let's hear it.
You say, "I understand the software has a steep learning curve. I have compiled a step-by-step tutorial document for you. Let me know which specific step you get stuck on."
I love that. Let's really look at why that works. First, you are remaining entirely professional.
Yes, you are validating their struggle. It has a steep learning curve.
Right. But you are firmly returning the labor to its rightful owner.
Exactly. You are refusing to do the task, but you are offering support. Let me know which specific step you get stuck on.
That forces them to actually open the software and try.
Yes, it calls their bluff entirely.
Okay, what about dismantling gaslighting? This one feels much harder because, well, you're usually angry or defensive.
It is very difficult because your adrenaline is pumping. But the rule here is absolute.
Right.
You must anchor the conversation strictly to empirical data.
So no emotions.
None. Let's use a script. If they say to you, "You're taking this too personally," your natural instinct is to defend your feelings.
Right. I would say, "I'm not taking it personally, you're just wrong."
And the moment you say that, you lose. You have accepted their premise that your emotions are the topic of debate.
Ah. Okay. So what is the proper linguistic pivot?
You say, "Let's remove emotion from the equation. The objective fact is that the deadline was missed. How are we rectifying the workflow?"
Wow. Let's look at that syntax shift.
Yeah.
You pivot completely away from the subjective you.
Yes. You pivot back to the objective it.
You flat out refuse to engage in the emotional debate. The objective fact is that the deadline was missed.
Exactly. It strips them of their ammunition. They have nothing to manipulate if you refuse to discuss subjective feelings.
That is so powerful. So the core takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Words are never just words.
They are the architecture of power dynamics in your career.
Yes. And your assignment is to observe your own workplace or even your social circles through this critical lens.
Listen for the euphemisms that mask exploitation.
Right. Notice when someone shifts a sentence from an objective action to a subjective emotion.
Yeah,
It's everywhere once you start looking.
it really is.
Now, before we go, there was a brief mention at the very beginning of the source material that I want to bring up. A final thought for you to mull over.
Oh, right. The AI aspect.
Yeah, the existential threat of AI-generated communication.
It's a terrifying prospect, honestly.
It is. Think about it. If these manipulative linguistic structures, like toxic positivity, gaslighting, weaponized incompetence,
Yeah.
if they're deeply embedded in our everyday corporate data.
Right. And AI language models are trained on that exact data.
Exactly. What happens when artificial intelligence is trained on this to automate our workplace emails?
It's a huge concern.
Are we about to enter an era where we aren't just being gaslit by our human managers, but we are facing perfectly optimized algorithmic gaslighting from our own company's AI?
A perfectly optimized synthetic manipulation.
Yeah, an AI that automatically reframes budget cuts as growth opportunities without a second thought. Something to think about as you navigate your inbox this week.
Stay vigilant out there.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, learner. Keep your eyes open, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive. Usually, when we imagine a battlefield, there's this underlying expectation of noise, right? Like a cinematic war zone comes with explosions, shouting, and, very clear lines drawn in the sand.
Yeah, you know exactly where one side ends and the opposing side begins.
Exactly. You know the exact identity of the opponent. But if you step into the modern corporate office today, or just log into your company's digital workspace, that battlefield is completely silent.
Completely silent. It's really the absolute definition of a covert operation.
Yeah, because we are looking at a conflict landscape that is entirely invisible to the naked eye.
Right, because the weapons in this particular theater, they aren't artillery, they are vocabulary.
Just words.
Just words. Every single team-wide memo, every casual instant message, every mid-year performance review, it all functions as a highly calculated strategic maneuver.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking the covert, psychological, linguistic arms race that is currently playing out in the modern workplace.
And for you listening, we're relying on a really fascinating set of sources today to guide us through this.
Yeah, we have transcripts and analytical notes from an advanced English linguistic analysis show. And they deconstruct corporate psychology and the raw semantics of the workplace.
And just to be clear, we are not talking about boring office jargon here.
Right. We're not just making fun of middle managers who constantly ask to circle back or ping you later.
No, this is much deeper. We are examining severe power dynamics. We're analyzing how syntax and vocabulary are deliberately engineered by both employers and employees to gain leverage.
Leverage and survival, really. The linguists behind these sources, they treat the modern office as this, fragile ecosystem where language is constantly being weaponized.
Yeah, and understanding this hidden layer of meaning, this deeply coded subtext beneath standard corporate speak, it actually functions as vital defensive architecture for your career.
And your mental health, honestly.
Right. Oh, absolutely, because the foundation of today's workplace is often a landscape characterized by, psychological manipulation, gaslighting, and weaponized incompetence.
So today we're looking at the systemic fallout of that specific environment, and we're examining how the battle for boundaries and sanity is fought entirely with words.
In a dialectic of power, really.
Right. And I want to jump straight into the most mainstream example of this linguistic arms race. It's a phrase that completely saturated the cultural zeitgeist recently.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting.
Let's look at the actual behavioral reality of the term, based on the linguistic analysis provided in our sources. Because when you strip away all the media hysteria, it just means
an employee deciding to work their contracted hours.
Right. Fulfilling the exact parameters of their job description and, refusing to perform unpaid overtime.
That is the factual behavioral baseline of the term, according to the linguists.
Okay, so wait, let me unpack this because I'm struggling to see the logic of the panic surrounding this. Because in literally any other era of human commerce, that was just called doing your job.
Doing the job you were hired to do, yeah.
Like if I hire a plumber to fix my kitchen sink, right? And he fixes the sink and then leaves, I don't write a negative review accusing him of quiet quitting just because he didn't, spontaneously repaint my cabinets for free.
That would be ridiculous.
Right. He fulfilled the contract we agreed upon. So by attaching this highly charged word, quitting, to the act of fulfilling a contract, are corporations essentially trying to make basic adherence to a job description sound like a breach of that very description.
Yes. That plumber analogy captures the semantic manipulation beautifully.
It's wild.
It is. The corporate narrative machine took a historically normal economic exchange, which is time and labor provided in exchange for an agreed-upon wage, and they completely shifted the framing.
How did they manage to do that so effectively, though?
By pathologizing the behavior.
Pathologizing it. Like treating it like an illness.
Exactly. They took a normal, healthy boundary and treated it as if it were a psychological or medical abnormality. By linking the word quitting to the act of fulfilling a contract, the corporate narrative successfully framed the enforcement of healthy boundaries as a moral failure.
Wow. They make it sound like a dereliction of duty.
Right, and the source material points out that this phrase is a brilliant, albeit highly manipulative misnomer.
Because it's deliberately inaccurate.
Yes, they are applying a deliberately inaccurate label to frame strict adherence to an employment contract as an act of, stealthy rebellion.
Painting the employee as someone engaging in this insidious betrayal of the company.
And the analysis links this semantic maneuver directly to another phrase that is deeply embedded in the corporate lexicon, which is going above and beyond.
Oh, sure. We hear that all the time.
Right. The term quiet quitting inherently implies that if you are not perpetually going above and beyond, you have essentially resigned in spirit.
But when you actually strip away the corporate varnish, and look at the raw economic subtext, going above and beyond is really just a euphemism for extracting free labor.
That's all it is. It is uncompensated work.
And the corporate lexicon dresses up that free labor in the language of virtue and loyalty. Like, if you do unpaid work, you're a team player.
You're dedicated.
Right. Therefore, the trap is set. If you refuse to do free work, you are labeled a quiet quitter.
And because the employer controls the vocabulary, they inherently control the moral high ground.
Which creates a dialectic where the employee is constantly on the defensive.
Yeah, they're forced to justify why they aren't donating their personal time to a for-profit entity.
But, employees are actively participating in this arms race too. It's not just one-sided.
No, not at all. The linguistic analysts detail a highly effective counterstrike from the employee side. It's a linguistic retaliation that completely shifts the narrative framework back.
And the counterterm that emerged organically was acting your wage.
Acting your wage. It's brilliant.
It is incredibly punchy. But from a linguistic perspective, according to the sources, why did that specific phrase catch fire? Why did it prove so effective as a defensive maneuver?
Well, the brilliance of acting your wage lies in its structure. It's a succinct rhyming idiom, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it plays directly off the familiar paternalistic phrase, acting your age.
Acting your age, acting your wage. Wow. Yeah, that gives it instant cultural resonance.
Exactly. It makes it highly memorable. But more importantly, it performs a crucial function in the subtext. It completely neutralizes the emotional manipulation tied to concepts like, corporate loyalty or being a family.
Oh, I hate when companies call themselves a family. So it strips the morality out of the conversation entirely.
Completely. It takes the emotional panic of quiet quitting and re-anchors the entire dynamic back to the raw, objective economics of the situation.
It communicates a very clear boundary. My behavioral output is directly correlated to my financial compensation.
Which is exactly what an employment contract is. It's a defensive maneuver rejecting the employer's attempt to pathologize the contract.
So we are really observing an intense dialectic of power here.
Oh, yeah. The employer attempts to shame the employee with accusations of quiet quitting, and the employee deflects that shame using the sheer economic reality of acting their wage.
But if employees are successfully shielding themselves, right, and protecting their time, managers who rely heavily on extracting that free labor, they're going to hit a wall.
They do hit a wall. And when guilt trips lose their efficacy, employers deploy much darker, highly calculated linguistic strategies to retaliate.
Right, because if quiet quitting is the employer's strategy to extract more free labor, the retaliatory move is about extraction of a completely different kind.
Extracting the employee from the company entirely.
Yes, and doing it without paying the financial or legal price.
Right. We're talking about the dark side of corporate empathy here, which is quiet firing.
Quiet firing. And our sources note the formal legal term for this is constructive dismissal.
Constructive dismissal.
Think about it like this for you listening. If you've ever been in a romantic relationship where one person desperately wants out, but they are too cowardly to be the bad guy and initiate the breakup, you've seen this dynamic.
Oh, definitely.
They start behaving so distantly, so terribly and frustratingly that they effectively force the other person to pull the plug.
They make the environment entirely intolerable just to avoid taking the blame for the dissolution of the relationship.
Exactly. And that maps perfectly onto the corporate strategy of constructive dismissal.
Because the motivation behind this behavior is deeply cynical and entirely economic.
How so?
Well, formally terminating an employee carries significant costs and risks for a company.
Right, like severance packages.
Severance, yes. And it can negatively impact the company's unemployment insurance premiums. And crucially, it opens the organization up to the massive liability of wrongful termination lawsuits.
So instead of actually firing the individual, The company just orchestrates a psychological environment that is so utterly intolerable that the employee throws their hands up and resigns.
Exactly. And because the resignation is technically voluntary on paper, the company sheds the employee while owing them absolutely nothing.
Wow. But the central focus of our analysis today is the mechanism of this strategy. Like, how do managers make the environment intolerable without leaving a massive paper trail of harassment?
That's the trick, isn't it? A manager orchestrating a quiet firing is rarely going to scream at an employee in the hallway.
Right.
They aren't going to explicitly demote someone in a loud, aggressive meeting because overt aggression is a legal liability that human resources can easily track.
So what do they do instead?
They rely entirely on the language of exclusion.
The language of exclusion.
Yeah. They utilize passive-aggressive, patronizing language that masterfully masquerades as empathy.
Okay, we actually have an exact quote from the source material that serves as a perfect specimen of this manipulation. I want to read it, and then I want us to completely deconstruct the syntax because it is wild.
Let's hear it.
Here is what a manager executing a quiet firing might casually drop in a one-on-one meeting. Quote, "We didn't think you'd have the bandwidth for the new flagship project, so we delegated it to David to spare you the stress."
Wow. Breaking down the mechanics of that single sentence is actually chilling.
It really is. Yeah. Because on the absolute surface level, it sounds profoundly considerate, doesn't it?
It does. The manager is purportedly protecting the employee's well-being. They're acknowledging the employee's limited bandwidth and actively claiming to spare them from unnecessary stress.
Like, if an employee took that sentence to HR and complained, HR would look at them as if they were unhinged.
Completely. The HR representative would likely say, your manager is actively looking out for your mental health. Why on earth are you upset?
But that is the trap.
It's a huge trap. Syntactically and functionally, that sentence is an act of forced obsolescence.
Forced obsolescence.
Yes. They are methodically rendering the employee obsolete, outdated, and ultimately useless to the organization, all while smiling.
Let's dissect the specific phrasing word by word, because the sources go deep on this. The manager begins with, "We didn't think."
Stop right there. The use of the royal we. It implies a broader leadership consensus that the employee was deliberately excluded from.
Right.
It signals immediate exclusion from the decision-making apparatus.
And then they follow up with, "You'd have the bandwidth."
Which is so insidious. It subtly undermines the employee's capacity, energy, and competence, but without ever overtly insulting their actual skills.
Right. It sounds like a technological limitation, like an internet router problem, rather than a professional critique.
Exactly. And then comes the resource shift. So we delegated it to David.
Ouch.
Yeah. This action actively removes high-value, highly visible work from the target employee's portfolio and hands it directly to a peer competitor.
Which artificially limits the target employee's growth potential and internal networking opportunities.
And finally, the manager seals the trap with, "to spare you the stress."
Weaponized empathy.
Pure weaponized empathy. It wraps the theft of a career opportunity inside an impenetrable layer of faux concern.
So the employee on the receiving end is just being methodically starved.
Starved, yes.
Like, they're being starved of a paycheck in the immediate term, but they are being starved of visibility, relevance, and career progression.
The manager just places them in a corner with nothing meaningful to accomplish.
And over time, the employee realizes their career trajectory has completely flatlined.
And the psychological toll of that, of feeling professionally useless and continually excluded, it becomes unbearable.
Compelling them to leave the organization of their own volition.
It is a linguistic poison pill wrapped in the language of a get-well card.
That is perfectly stated. And, people being systematically starved of relevance while simultaneously dodging the gaslighting of quiet quitting accusations from other corners of the company, they're eventually going to hit a profound breaking point.
The stress load is astronomical.
So when the workforce starts cracking under this immense pressure, how do these corporations handle the resulting crisis of burnout?
Well, according to the sources, not well.
Right, because the logical, systemic response to a workforce burning out from toxic environments and excessive workloads would be structural change.
Of course. You hire more personnel, you pay a livable wage so people aren't working multiple jobs just to survive.
You terminate the toxic managers orchestrating these covert, quiet firings. You fix the machine.
But the sources point out that corporations absolutely avoid structural changes at all costs. Instead, they simply change the vocabulary again.
They execute a profound pivot. shifting the entire internal discourse away from structural economics and redirecting it heavily toward therapeutic individualism.
Therapeutic individualism. The analysis points out the sheer absurdity of this corporate pivot.
It is absurd. Instead of addressing chronic understaffing or unlivable wages or abusive management structures, the company offers employees like a free subscription to a meditation app.
I'm struggling to comprehend the audacity of it, honestly.
Same. Instead of providing a proper, uninterrupted lunch break away from the desk, employees are expected to practice mindfulness at their desks while simultaneously handling the workload of 3 colleagues who recently quit and were never replaced.
And the sources highlight this exact contradiction. To pull off this massive pivot, the corporate world relies heavily on the bastardization of a very specific concept.
Yes, the analysis isolates the absolute holy grail of this linguistic deflection strategy.
The word resilience.
Resilience. It sounds inherently heroic and positive, doesn't it?
It does. It brings to mind surviving great odds.
Right.
And in its pure, unadulterated form, true resilience is a beautiful human capacity.
It represents the psychological and emotional ability to recover from unavoidable catastrophic adversity.
Unavoidable is the key word there. We use it to describe bouncing back from a natural disaster, the tragic loss of a loved one, or a sudden severe illness.
Events that are entirely outside of human control.
Exactly. But the corporate application of the term twists that foundational meaning entirely.
It really does.
In the corporate lexicon, resilience has undergone severe semantic dilution. The HR apparatus takes a word that implies surviving unavoidable natural trauma and dilutes it until it simply means, well, the ability to endure corporate abuse without complaining.
It acts as psychological armor.
But it's not armor against unavoidable disasters. It is armor specifically designed to make employees bulletproof against systemic, highly avoidable corporate mismanagement.
So, okay, when an exhausted employee is nearing a breakdown because they've been working 60-hour weeks for a manager who is systematically trying to quietly fire them,
the company's automated response is to send a calendar invite to a resilience webinar.
right, let's decode the subtext of that invitation. What is the actual underlying message being delivered when a company offers a resilience seminar in the face of structural failure?
The underlying message is deeply insidious. The unsustainable workload, the toxic management practices, the depressed wages.
Which are all man-made corporate policies, by the way.
Right, but they are treated as immutable facts of nature. The corporate language treats a 60-hour work week like it is gravity.
Like it's just a force of nature.
You can't change gravity. You can only adapt to it.
So by treating a man-made corporate policy like a force of nature, they declare the workload is immutable, unchanging and unchangeable.
And the corollary to that framing is devastating for the employee.
Because if the toxic environment is an immutable fact of nature, then any burnout, stress, or psychological breakdown experienced by the employee is framed entirely as a personal, internal failing.
Exactly. The subtext dictates the system isn't broken. You just aren't resilient enough to survive the system.
They shift the onus, the entire burden of proof, and the total responsibility for basic well-being squarely onto the victim of the toxic environment.
And by co-opting the vocabulary of wellness and self-care, they successfully neutralize structural grievances.
It's a magic trick.
It is. They shift the onus of survival onto the shoulders of the exhausted worker. It represents the ultimate individualization of a systemic structural problem.
Like, if you fail, it's not because the corporate machinery is crushing you. It's because you failed to do enough yoga.
Basically, yeah.
Listening to this, it feels like navigating a labyrinth where every single word is a trapdoor.
It really does.
And we've spent significant time diagnosing the illness today, looking at how the employer uses quiet quitting to extract free labor, quiet firing to extract themselves from legal liability, and resilience to extract themselves from structural accountability.
It's a lot of extraction.
A lot. So I want to shift our focus now from diagnosing the problem to equipping you, our listeners, with the actual medicine.
The defensive architecture.
Right. How do we build defensive architecture against this dystopian linguistic labyrinth?
Well, the definitive answer provided by the linguistic analysts is that you must fight language with language.
You have to build a rigorous paper trail.
In corporate survival circles, this is widely known as CYA, cover your assets.
And the sources use a fantastic phrase to anchor this concept. They say, air is fleeting, ink is permanent.
Air is fleeting, ink is permanent. I love that.
When dealing with gaslighting and manipulation, Verbal communication becomes a massive, unacceptable liability.
Oh, absolutely. If you have a deeply concerning conversation with a manipulative manager in the hallway or over a quick phone call, that conversation effectively never happened.
The air dissipates.
And when things inevitably go wrong, it becomes their word against yours, and the manager inherently possesses the institutional power.
Which highlights the absolute necessity of codifying interactions.
Yes, codifying. And codifying isn't just about taking diligent notes for your own personal memory.
No, it's an active, strategic process.
It's the active process of shifting the burden of contradiction onto the opposing party through systematic written documentation.
Let's dive into the tactical application of this. We have the ultimate script breakdown from the source material, and I want us to heavily analyze this specific email scenario to see how this defensive architecture works in practice.
Let's set the stage.
Okay, setting the stage for our listeners. You are in a verbal meeting, perhaps a quick morning stand-up. Your boss verbally instructs you to dangerously bypass a standard required compliance review in order to drastically speed up a product launch.
Which is a massive institutional risk.
Massive. If the launch fails or if an audit discovers the compliance breach, severe consequences will follow.
And in a toxic environment, the manager is delivering this directive verbally for one specific reason.
So that if the situation detonates, they maintain plausible deniability.
Exactly. They can easily deny ever giving the order, leaving the subordinate employee positioned perfectly as the scapegoat.
So as the employee, you cannot simply say, okay, and execute the dangerous order. You must return to your desk and immediately draft an email.
And listen closely to the exact phrasing recommended by the linguistic analysis here.
Right, here's the script. Quote, "Just to memorialize our alignment from this morning's stand-up, I will proceed with expediting the launch without the standard compliance review, as per your directive. I will execute this by 3:00 p.m., unless you advise otherwise."
That short paragraph is an absolute masterpiece of defensive syntax.
Let's perform a deep dive into the specific syntactical choices, beginning with the opening phrase, memorialize our alignment.
Memorialize our alignment. On the surface, it sounds incredibly polite, almost painfully corporate.
It uses all the expected buzzwords of friendly teamwork.
Right. It uses the precise vocabulary of cooperation, which makes it very difficult for the manager to get defensive about receiving the email.
You can't really get mad at someone for aligning with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But structurally and legally, that phrase functions as a deposition.
A deposition.
Yes. To memorialize something is to create a permanent, irrefutable written record of an event. By deploying this specific phrase, the employee is subtly signaling that they have just documented a highly specific, highly risky verbal instruction to break established protocol.
So the employee is creating a sworn statement of fact, completely disguised as a friendly, proactive follow-up.
It is the equivalent of wrapping a brick in silk.
Wrapping a brick in silk. You're smiling, using collaborative language, but you are laying down hard, undeniable evidence.
And then we move to the second half of the email, which the sources highlight as a brilliant tactical maneuver.
I will execute this by 3:00 p.m. unless you advise otherwise.
The inclusion of that conditional phrasing, unless you advise otherwise, that's where the true binding power of this communication lies.
Because that phrase takes the onus of action, the burden of stopping the event, and places it strictly and entirely on the gaslighting manager.
The mechanics of that interaction are fascinating. You have clearly stated your intended action based directly on their verbal directive.
Right.
And by adding, unless you advise otherwise, you force them into a deeply uncomfortable corner.
If they want to deny giving the dangerous order, they're forced to reply in writing and explicitly stop you.
And if they reply and stop you, you don't break compliance and your professional integrity remains safe.
But consider the alternative scenario, which is highly likely with a cowardly manager trying to avoid generating a paper trail.
If they stay completely silent and ignore the email,
Their silence now functionally and legally constitutes written consent.
because you've trapped them with the deadline. By stating, I will execute this by 3:00 p.m., you establish a timeline.
If 3:00 p.m. rolls around and they haven't replied to stop you, they have tacitly approved the compliance breach.
Let's visualize the aftermath of building this impenetrable fortress. Assume you execute the launch. 2 weeks later, the project fails catastrophically, specifically because the compliance review was bypassed.
The executive team storms into the department, furious, demanding immediate answers.
And your gaslighting manager, operating on instinct, immediately attempts to throw you under the bus.
Claiming they have no idea why you skipped the review and denying they ever gave such a directive.
That is the exact moment you open your email folder and produce the receipt.
You forward the memorialized email directly to the executive team.
You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to engage in a desperate emotional argument.
The ink does all the fighting on your behalf.
This is the practical application of understanding subtext and wielding advanced English to protect your professional integrity.
Words, when structured with precision, transform into binding evidence. The employee has successfully taken a highly vulnerable he said, she said verbal interaction and transformed it into an impenetrable fortress of accountability.
It is incredibly empowering to realize that you do not have to be a passive victim of corporate subtext.
You can wield the exact same linguistic tools to protect yourself.
But it requires constant vigilance. It requires a fundamental understanding that in these specific environments, language is no longer primarily used for communication.
It's used almost exclusively for documentation and leverage.
Exactly.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's synthesize the main takeaway from our listener. Language is power.
The specific words your company chooses to use in widespread memos are not accidental. The casual phrases your manager drops in a one-on-one meeting are not arbitrary.
We challenge you to actively listen to the language deployed in your own workplace tomorrow morning.
Pay specialized attention to the weaponized wellness language. When the corporate apparatus starts discussing self-care, bandwidth, or resilience, evaluate the subtext critically.
Ask yourself if the language is genuinely supportive of your well-being, or if it is merely semantic dilution designed to shift the onus of systemic, structural failure directly onto your shoulders.
Don't just act as an observer. Become an active participant in your own defense.
Master the vocabulary we've unpacked today. Understand the immense power of utilizing words like memorialize to instantly create a binding record.
Understand how to shift the onus of action back onto leadership using conditional phrasing and strict deadlines.
Recognize a deliberate misnomer when your healthy contractual boundaries are pathologized as quiet quitting.
And most importantly, remain deeply wary of the passive-aggressive, exclusionary phrasing that signals a quiet firing and forced obsolescence.
Equip yourself with this defensive linguistic architecture. Remember the golden rule of navigating these spaces. Air is fleeting, ink is permanent.
Ink is permanent.
But we want to leave you with a final, lingering, and incredibly provocative thought, extrapolated directly from the deeper implications of our source material today.
Think about the brilliant defensive email we just meticulously dissected.
It is an absolute masterpiece of self-preservation. It is entirely necessary for survival in a toxic environment. But pose this scenario to yourself. If survival in the modern workplace requires every single employee to become an amateur defense attorney,
Constantly treating everyday hallway conversations as binding legal depositions,
and spending valuable hours building these impenetrable fortresses of written CYA accountability, does this dialectic of power ultimately guarantee the absolute obsolescence of workplace trust?
it's a dark thought.
What happens to actual creativity, to true innovation, and to genuine human collaboration when an entire company is just silently sending defensive CYA emails to each other in a Cold War stalemate of self-preservation?
You walked into a battlefield that was completely silent. Is the ultimate cost of surviving that invisible linguistic war simply the death of trust?
Let that mull over in your mind the next time someone casually asks to memorialize your alignment.